Welcome to Be the Good with Kate, the show that leaves you inspired to find your passions and help others along the way, because we all have the power to make a difference. Decided to rebroadcast some Be the Good with Kate gems for a bit here in between our usual Friday new releases. So if you missed these the first time, now you get to hear from these inspiring folks. And if you have been here the whole time, first of all, thank you. And second, if you're like me, hearing something again is when the ideas really start to stick. Re-release here, new episode on Friday. Let's keep the good news spreading. Click that subscribe button wherever you are listening right now to be notified when new episodes are released. Or if you prefer an email notification, head to katechericello.com/bethegood to get on that list. The links are in the show notes. Enjoy. And as always, I love hearing from you. Reach out anytime.
Today on Be the Good with Kate, I'm honored to introduce you to Terry Tucker. He's got quite the story to share with us today, and here's just a little bit about him. Terry is the founder of Motivational Check. He's a speaker and author and has a unique and positive bent regarding the concepts of mindset and self-improvement to share with us today. As a former NCAA Division I basketball player at the Citadel, SWAT team hostage negotiator, and cancer warrior for the past 10 years, which has included the amputation of his foot in 2018 and leg in 2020. Terry focuses on the healthy aspects of being sick by concentrating on 4 truths to help others lead their uncommon and extraordinary life, which I know he will tell us more about today. So Terry, thanks so much for being here.
Well, Kate, thanks for having me. I'm really looking forward to talking with you today.
Well, right back at you. So please tell everybody a little bit more about who you are and what you do in your own words.
Sure. So I was born and raised on the south side of Chicago. I am the oldest of 3 boys. You can't tell this from looking at me or from my voice, but I'm 6'8" tall. And as you mentioned, I played college basketball at the Citadel in Charleston, South Carolina. When I graduated from college, I moved home to find a job. I'm really going to date myself now, but this was long before the internet was available to help people find employment. Fortunately, I found that first job in the corporate headquarters in the marketing department of Wendy's International, the fast food, the hamburger chain. Unfortunately, I lived with my parents for the next 3.5 years as I helped my mother care for my father and my grandmother, who were both dying of different forms of cancer. Again, started out at Wendy's in marketing, then moved to hospital administration, and then made a real big pivot in my life and became a police officer. And part of what I did during that time was I was a SWAT team hostage negotiator. After law enforcement, I started my own school security consulting business, coached girls high school basketball, became an author in 2020. But for the last almost 11 years now, I've been battling this rare form of cancer. And then I guess just finally, my wife and I have been married for almost 30 years. We have 1 child, a daughter, who's a graduate of the United States Air Force Academy and is an officer in the new branch of the military, the Space Force.
Fantastic. I didn't know that detail from your bio. How about that?
Keep some things secret, you know.
Well, I've been a part of the USO show troupe for a number of years now as a singer. And so I always love learning about what people are up to regarding the military and all of that. So that's amazing that your daughter's been into there.
Well, thank you for doing the USO. I know everybody who's deployed and overseas and stuff enjoys getting a little piece of America come to them. So thank you for doing that.
Well, we enjoy it just as much, seeing all of the different service members for sure. So Terry, I know you have Motivational Check LLC now. I'd love to hear a little bit more about your journey to starting that.
Sure. So Motivational Check was a phrase when I was in the police academy that our defensive tactics instructor gave us. That basically, you're having a tough day, you're having a tough time getting through a drill or something like that. You could just scream that phrase out. And we were the 84th recruit class in the Cincinnati, Ohio Police Academy. And we would respond, the whole class would respond with an 84, kind of a loud, just to let the person know, hey, you're not alone. We're all hurting, but we're all going to get through this together. So when I was looking for a title for my blog and eventually for my company, I started the blog first. Motivational Check just seemed to be something motivational that I could use, and it meant something to me, and I was trying to put that out there to help other people as well. So I started this blog. People were like, you should take your experiences, whether it was in law enforcement, coaching, through cancer, or whatever, and put that out there. And I was like, a blog? I'm old. I don't know how to start a blog. I mean, how do you do this? And so I literally spent 4 months putting 4 pages together on my blog. I'm sure my daughter could have done it in about 15 minutes, but literally it took me 4 months to explore and learn. Oh, I don't know what that means. I got to go find out. Oh, okay, I can apply that and stuff like that. So really my job now, in all honesty, I'm probably coming to the end of my life with my cancer journey, is to put as much goodness, as much positivity, as much motivation, as much inspiration, as much love back into the world as I possibly can with whatever time I have left. And so motivational check is a big part of that. And then I started Motivational Check LLC when I started the speaking component of the blog. So that's kind of how all this came together.
I just love the story behind the name for sure. I think that was a great way to tie that in. And just incredible, so you hear so many stories about people pushing through with cancer, just trying to keep their life as it was and continue, or really retreating and kind of shutting off their life. And you found this way to throw your energy into making the world a better place. And I just think that's amazing. So I need to ask you, was there a moment that you made that decision? Was that just something that you knew in your heart all along? How'd that come about?
Yeah, I think it goes back to when my father was dying of cancer. My dad had end-stage breast cancer back in the 1980s. And back then, they really didn't know how to treat men with breast cancer. And they pretty much told him to go home and die. And he lasted another 3.5 years. He was in real estate. And he lasted another 3.5 years because I believe he had a purpose. He had something to do with his life other than, lay in bed and say, woe is me, and, the end is near. And I kind of tucked that away in the back of my brain and said, you know what, when it's my time in the barrel, which, it's always, everybody has their time, that I'm going to remember that. And so when I got cancer, it was like, okay, how can I turn this ugliness? How can I, take these cards that I absolutely do not like and turn them into something positive? And I made a decision very early on in my cancer journey that I would not ever take out my misfortune on a doctor, on a nurse, on a therapist, on a technician, somebody who was trying to help me. And I've seen a lot of people do that. And I know why they do that. They're afraid, they're anxious and things like that. But I wanted this to be like, okay, these are the cards I've been dealt. And I remember when I first found out I had this incredibly rare form of melanoma, I found out from a podiatrist because I had a callus break open on the bottom of my foot. And this guy was a friend of mine. And I remember when he called me with the news, and he was hemming and hawing and really couldn't get it out. And obviously the more difficulty he was having explaining it to me, the more scared I was becoming, until finally he just laid it out for me. He said, Terry, I've been a doctor for 25 years. I've never seen this form of cancer. You have this rare form of melanoma that appears on the bottom of the feet and the palms of the hands. And he recommended I go to MD Anderson Cancer Center in Houston and be treated for that. And I remember going through all the, I guess, emotions that we would associate with grief. First it was denial. I can't possibly have cancer. I've done everything right in my life. I've exercised. I've eaten right. And then I got mad. Like, I've done everything right in my life. Why am I going through this? And then I got to a point where it was kind of bargaining with God. Our daughter was in high school when I got cancer. And it was like, look, just let me live long enough for her to graduate from high school. And then I got a little down. And then I just got to the point where it was like, this sucks, but I'm going to have to embrace the suck. I'm going to have to use this and take it and do the very best that I can with it, with the understanding that I know what the outcome is going to be. I mean, 11 years ago, they told me I wouldn't live 5 years. And here I am. It's really kind of funny. Every year I get a letter from the tumor board at MD Anderson asking me to circle one of 3 choices. Are you alive with cancer? Are you alive without cancer? Or are you dead? And I keep hanging around because I haven't figured out how to circle the third one yet. So it's just kind of a funny. I mean, you have to have humor. You have to laugh at this. You have to, make the best of a bad situation. And that's just what I've tried to do over these last 11 years now.
Wow. Your mindset is unbelievable. It's so incredible. I can't wait to share this episode with people, because no matter what someone's going through, just to hear of like, it doesn't have to rule your life in all parts of your life. Like, I'm sure, every day, of course, you're living with it, but you've chosen to do everything you can to give back and to continue living. And that's just absolutely beautiful. And I already feel like you've given so many good news moments already in these couple minutes of talking to you. And I have to tell the people listening, you're someone who, just in your emails to me, I already could tell your personality, this upbeat, this energy right through your writing. So I want to hear if there are other good news moments you'd like to share from your interactions with people from the time now that you've been an author and speaker, and people you've met in sharing your own story.
Yeah, it's fun for me because I wrote this book back in 2020, literally during the period of time where I was healing from having my leg amputated until I started chemotherapy. I sat down at the computer. I already had, the book's called Sustainable Excellence, the 10 Principles to Leading Your Uncommon and Extraordinary Life. And I already had the principles, but I sat down at the computer every day and I built stories, and they're real stories about real people underneath each of the principles. And it's always fun for me as an author when people reach out, because for some reason, there's always one principle that resonates with the reader that, or I did that, I experienced it, or I know somebody, and can we talk about this? And so that has been pretty amazing. And I'll tell you a story. So I go every 3 weeks now for the tumors that I have in my lungs to be treated. And there was a nurse when I first started in the infusion center. She was also starting. But she's about 25 years old, already a nurse, but learning how to do things on the unit. And about 8 months later, she was taking care of me by herself. And she said, "Terry, I've got a story I want to tell you, but I'm a little uncomfortable telling you that." And I mean, I didn't know how to respond to that. It was like, well, it sounds like it might be a great story. I hope you find the courage to tell me. And so she was in and out doing things. And about 2 hours later, she came into the room and I'm sitting in the chair, and she sat down on the bed and she's like, "All right, here's the story." She's like, "When I first met you," she said, "I was going to get out of nursing. I'd had a very good friend of mine die. I was in a really dark place. I talked to my mom and dad, and I was going to quit nursing and I was going to go to work for Amazon." And she said, "Then I met you. And I saw what you go through every 3 weeks. I see all the ugliness. And then I went back in your chart and I read everything that you've been through, losing your leg, losing your foot, the drugs that you were on and things like that." And she said, "I knew I was where I was supposed to be." Now, if she would have never told me that story, I would have had no idea that my life had an impact on her in that way. And I always tell people, I don't care how ugly things are for you, how dark they are, you would be amazed at the people that are watching you and would give anything to walk in your shoes, or would look at you and say, "Oh my gosh, that person has so much potential." And we kind of dismiss it like, "Oh no, I'm just a sick, dying old man." No, you're not. You're still vibrant. You're still here. And I remember when I had my, my leg amputated, about 6 months later, my doctor showed me the CAT scans for when I had the cancer in my leg and the tumors in my lungs. And I have no medical background. I don't know how to read a CAT scan or anything like that. But I kind of know, like, well, that doesn't look like it should be there, and things like that. So I'm looking at this CAT scan, and I had these big tumors in my lungs. I had fluid all around the pleural spaces on the outside of my lungs. And I looked at my doctor and I was like, "How was I alive?" And he kind of grinned and sort of shook his head. And he's like, "I have absolutely no idea how you were alive, during that period," which said to me that God's not done with me yet. When I die, how I die, where I die, way above my pay grade. Don't spend a lot of time worrying about it. Spend more time now living the life that I think he wants me to do. And I think, again, that's to put as much goodness, positivity, motivation, love back into the world as I possibly can.
Well, just as you were telling that story, what kept going through my mind was, God is not done with Terry yet. God, and then you said it. Exactly.
Yeah. And again, I don't know why I'm still here. I think I know. I think I'm doing what God wants me to do, but I'm on a clinical trial drug now that I started with other people, and they've all passed away. And so, it's like, why am I sort of the last man standing? Why am I the standard bearer? But I am. And that's the way I feel about it. It's like, look, I'm not going to quit. I'm going to keep going. I don't care how bad it is, because the way I look at it, and one of the things I learned from team sports and I think for me, it was sports. I think it can be with whatever team you're on, your family, your colleagues, your friends, whatever it is. One of the things that team sports taught me is the importance of being part of something that's bigger than yourself. You realize on a team that if you don't do your job, not only do you let yourself down, but you let your teammates down, your coaches down, your fans down, et cetera. And if you think about it, the biggest team game that we all play is this game of life. And so, being in a situation where I'm on this drug now that more than likely is not going to save my life, but it may save the life of somebody 5 years from now or 10 years from now that I'll never meet based on the data that the doctors are gleaning from my blood tests and my scans and things like that. And to me, that's part of being something that's bigger than yourself.
Wow. Terry, when it gets extra hard, because I'm sure that it just must be a roller coaster of emotions, are there sayings or mantras or rituals that you go back to help you through?
I pray. I pray for about an hour every day, and I pray for, I'd be lying to you, Kate, if I told you I didn't pray for myself. I certainly do. But
you better add that to your prayer list.
Yeah. I pray for all the people that I've met over the years, that have had cancer, that are still fighting and things like that. So prayer is incredibly important to me. And I had a nurse. It seems like all my stories are nurse or basketball. So hang with me on this. So
okay.
I had a nurse one time who asked me, she said, what was it like to have your foot amputated and to have your leg amputated? And I told her the stories. I had my leg amputated right in the middle of COVID. I was not allowed to have anybody with me. It was my wife dropped me off at the hospital. I was the only surgery that day. I was in this huge, pre-op room by myself. I said it was horrible. Yeah. But what I told her is that cancer can take all my physical faculties, but cancer can't touch my mind. It can't touch my heart, and it can't touch my soul. And that's who I am. That's who you are, Kate. That's who everybody that is listening to us really is. And we spend a lot of time on our bodies. And I'm not saying you shouldn't. Yes, you should go to the gym. Yes, you should eat right. Yes, you should get enough rest, all that kind of stuff. But I don't think we spend enough time on our heart, our mind, and our soul, because that's really who we are. This body goes away at the end of the day, when we're done with it. It's just a vessel or a house to hold who we really are. So when things get bad, and they get bad all the time, I just think about what's really important, and I focus on the things that I can control. I'll tell you one more story. When I was at the Citadel, we had a president there by the name of James Stockdale, and he was an admiral in the Navy when he retired. And he had been the highest ranking prisoner of war at the Hanoi Hilton, the prisoner of war camp during the Vietnam War. And he organized the resistance, and he did all kinds of stuff. And he was awarded the Medal of Honor, the highest award that the military awards for bravery. And I remember being at an event with him. He was the president of college. I was just a cadet. I didn't spend a lot of time with him. But somebody asked him, who were the people that survived that horrible, that endured that? He was 8 years a prisoner of war.
8.
And he said, let me tell you who didn't survive it. He said it wasn't the big, tall, strong, tough guys that, thought they could handle any amount of torture or beating. He said because the Viet Cong had plenty of time to think about ways to beat these people and literally beat them to death. And he said it wasn't even the optimists, the people who were like, we're going to get released by Thanksgiving or Christmas or Easter. And he said Thanksgiving and Christmas and Easter would come and we wouldn't be released. And he said those people would die of a broken heart. He said the people that survived realized what they could control, and they controlled it. And he said in our case, the only thing we could control was the thoughts in our mind and the breathing in our lungs. He said everything else was at the discretion of the Viet Cong. When we ate, when we went to the bathroom, when we got tortured, when we got beaten, was all at their discretion. So if you were going to survive that, you had to learn to control your mind. And let's face it, most of the people listening to us are not incarcerated. They're not, they can get out, They can do things. But think about what you can control and control that. And then don't worry about all the other stuff. It'll take care of itself.
That's powerful advice for life. And whether it's the smallest thing to the biggest thing you could possibly imagine, which is not even half of what I'm sure he went through. So That's a brilliant story. Oh my gosh. I just can't imagine 8 years of that too. Still wrapping my head around that.
It's really interesting. He and his wife wrote a book. The book is such that he writes a chapter and then she writes a chapter and then he writes a chapter. And it's basically, here's what I was going through in the prisoner of war camp. And then she writes, well, here's what I was doing at home to try to get you released or to try to work with the government. And they would write letters back and forth to each other. And unbeknownst to the Viet Cong, those letters were coded. So they were sending coded messages back to each other. The book is called In Love and War. I found it fascinating. Just the kind of, the prisoner of war stuff is good enough, but then to think sort of on the home front, what your wife was doing to try to get you released and get yourself back home to the family. It was a very interesting book.
Wow. I'm going to look that one up. And Terry, before I ask my last question, I was just thinking, with Motivational Check, has there been an aspect of it that has been the most surprising to you? Any of the features, from the blogging to the people connections to the speaking engagements to authoring a book?
That's a great question. I honestly don't know if I can pick one thing. I have met so many people through either my speaking engagements, through people who've reached out to me, as an author, said, hey, I read your book and, this is what I got out of it. There's been, I've been a guest on over 600 podcasts all around the world, all different kinds of people, have yet to have a bad experience. People are just so gracious, so caring, so loving, so giving of themselves that, that's why I love doing this. This is my purpose, at this point in time. And we all get scared, and I get that. I was doing a podcast with a former NFL player about 6 months ago. And this guy's like 6'6", like 320 pounds. He put his forearm up on the table and his forearm blocked out the camera. This guy was huge. And we were talking after the podcast, and he said, Terry, when I started the podcast, I was scared to death. I'm like, Marcus, how could you have been scared? You're an NFL lineman. You're huge. How could you? He's like, I didn't think anybody would take me seriously. And I told him my experience when I started, I had a motivational speaking business and COVID hit and nobody was doing anything. And somebody reached out to me and said, would you like to be a guest on my podcast? And Kate, this was honestly my response. I was like, what's a podcast? I had absolutely no idea what this guy was talking about. And he said, well, it's this. And I'm like, yeah, sure. Like so many people during COVID, I had to figure out a different way to retool how I delivered my business, how I did what I do. And I said, sure. But I remember when I started, I had Post-it notes all around my camera, and somebody would ask me a question. I'd be like, well, the answer to that is the person. I was horrible. I could not tell a story. I could not do anything. And I had my publisher and I were talking. And I said, I listen to every podcast I've been on because I want to do better. I want to be a better guest for the hosts that allow me to come on their show. He's like, Terry, you don't understand. It's not about being good. It's just about not sucking. And I said, well, thanks for the title of my next book, Just Don't Suck. But I said, no, that's not what it's about. I want to be good at this. If I'm going to spend my time doing it, why would I not want to be good for myself, but also be good for the hosts that allow me to come on their show? So it's just a different perspective of, I guess, looking at it. And I don't know, that's kind of a long-winded answer to your question. So hopefully it answered it.
Not at all. And so that is relatable with that. I listen back to everything I do, however painful it feels, right? Why is it so hard to listen to ourselves talk? But it is. But you know what? If I didn't, I would still be however I was that first time I turned on the camera to do the first episode. Right. And it helps so much. And we just have to, even if that's a minuscule fear on the big picture of life, it's like every bit counts in that. Face that little fear and you'll start to face bigger fears.
It really is true. And people ask me, are you ever afraid? I'm like, I'm afraid all the time. I go to treatment every 3 weeks. I get, stuck with needles all the time. I throw up, I shake, I do all this ugly stuff, but I keep doing it. And again, going back to what I said about being part of something that's bigger than yourself, say, yeah, I mean, I'm not a masochist. I mean, I don't enjoy any of this. This is not something that, I wish I was doing, but I'm afraid all the time. But I guess that's the difference, between somebody who's paralyzed by fear and somebody that can move through it and say, okay, I'm not going to like this. But, it kind of goes back to, you mentioned the 4 truths. And one of the truths is to embrace the pain and the difficulty that we all experience in life and use that pain and difficulty to make us stronger and more resilient. So instead of running from pain, instead of saying, no, get away from me, I don't want to do this, you do just the opposite. You take that pain, you flip it inside, you burn it as fuel, you use it as energy to make you stronger and more resilient. And I know people are going to listen to say, oh, yeah, Terry, you can do that. I could do it. Trust me, I am the biggest wimp in the world. So if I can do it, I promise anybody listening to us can do it.
Oh, I love that. Hey, what are the other 3 from the list?
The other 3, the first one, and I think the first one really is the most, I used to think there was not one that was more important than the other, but I really think this one is the most important. The first one is control your mind, or your mind is going to control you. I mentioned the second one. The third one I look at more as a legacy type of truth, and it's this: what you leave behind is what you weave in the hearts of other people. And then the fourth one, I think, is pretty self-explanatory. It's as long as you don't quit, you can never be defeated. And I call those, they're my 4 truths, but I call them the sort of the bedrock of my soul. They're just a good place, I think, to build a quality life from.
Great. Oh, that's so great. I know, Terry, last question for you. I've been asking everybody this the past season, and it's so interesting to hear what people have to say on it. If someone came to you, and perhaps they already have, and said, I want to make a difference with my time here on Earth. I'm overwhelmed. I don't know how to start. Is there any advice you'd give them?
Yeah, the way I look at it is this, and Viktor Frankl said this. Viktor Frankl was a prisoner of war, was a concentration camp survivor in World War II and became a psychiatrist. And he talks about the importance of finding our purpose in life. And I can't stress how important that is. And I guess maybe I should say finding our purposes in life, because I think back on my life. When I was young, I felt my purpose was athletics, was to play sports. And then as I became an adult, it was more to get into law enforcement and do the things that I did there. And now, as I'm coming to the end of my life, to do the things that I've already mentioned. So I think you can have multiple purposes, but I think that's got to be the focus of our lives. And so many people live a casual life. And because of living that type of life, their goals, their dreams, their ambitions become a casualty of that unplanned living. So I would tell people, find your purpose in life. And you do that by using your unique gifts and talents. Kate, you're a performer, you've got a beautiful voice, you're a dancer, you're all those kind of things. I could never do that stuff. That's not my gifts. Those aren't the things that God gave me. Those are the things that he gave you, and you use them, to help people. You do USO shows and things like that. I mean, maybe you're good in math, maybe you're good in science, maybe you're good in English. Well, whatever it is, maybe you're good with your hands, you fix cars, whatever. Find your purpose in life based on your goals, based on your talents and your abilities, and then live that life. And I mean, really live it. And people, well, I don't know what to do. I know you don't know what to do. Do something. Just start here. Start now. I mean, you don't have to have all the. I think back about the story I heard about Sarah Blakely, who started Spanx, who her husband said, she just did it. He even said she would have waited. If she would have waited to have everything lined up, to have everything in a row, somebody would have beat her to the punch. But he said, you know what? She just did it and figured it out as she went along. That's what I would recommend to people. Use your unique gifts and talents and just do it. And if it doesn't work, then do something else and do something else. And eventually you'll get to the point where you'll find your purpose in life. And if you live that purpose, when the end comes, when death comes, not going to be nearly as scary, because you actually lived the reason that you were put on this earth to do.
Terry, I just want to rewind and start at the beginning and listen to all of this over again right away, because it's been filled with just inspiration and just beauty from how your whole mindset and your whole outlook and everything you've been through, and now how you're living this life. I mean, it sounds like you always have lived a life of giving back, but now just with your whole being of making the world a better place. And I can't thank you enough for you being you, and also for sharing it with my listeners today. I can't wait to share this.
Well, Kate, thanks for having me on. I really enjoyed talking with you.
Thanks for tuning in. If you found this helpful, a 5-star review, like, or comment means the world to me. And if you found insight in this episode, chances are someone else will too. Share with a friend to give them a boost today. Until next time, I'm Kate Chiaricella-Tente, and this was Be the Good with Kate.